welcome back oh, for fuck again. Welcome back to Ready Nerd Go, Graphic Policy's newest tabletop RPG podcast. My name's Alex. This is Anko,
Welcome.
and today we are going to be talking about game masters. Now, again, you actually sent me the list for this a week ago and told me not to look into anything, so I didn't. So again, to continue our theme, I know nothing, and you're providing the color commentary, as it were.
It's more fun that way.
Always.
But yeah, so I was thinking this week, since we've talked about players and game masters and generally what they are, but we haven't really gotten into the game master side of things. So I figure having an episode on that would be kind of a fun thing to delve into, especially because they're not, depending on the game, you don't even need one. But the most typical example of RPGs that everybody thinks about, Dungeons and Dragons, pretty much requires one. I mean, you can get tools that kind of give the facsimile of one, but for the most part, if you're playing something like that, you need a game master. But there are games where that's just not at all the case, and I thought it'd be kind of fun to get into those and poke around in that area for a little bit too.
Absolutely. So the first question we have, well, given the more or less the theming slash contents, I don't know how that works on the show. The the general guideline for what today is going to look like. Do you need a game master in general for the majority of games? I've always thought you do, but you're saying you don't.
Yeah, so I will with the way you phrase that, I would say with the majority of them, play a lot better with a GM, because like the main reason the main reason you have a GM in these type of games is they're pretty much like, if to use the video game analogy, they're pretty much the computer that generates the game for you, right?
Right.
So when you have, it is possible to kind of redelegate those roles back to, the person playing the game, but depending on the system in question, that can be easier or harder. Generally speaking, the more like I guess tactically complex a game is, the harder it is to kind of not have a GM involved. Because like when you have a more narrative focused game, it's a lot easier to remove the GM as a separate player, just because you're not really worried about trying to outplay somebody, right?
Right.
But
So
in like a more tactical game like D&D or GURPS or Pathfinder or one of those, where a lot of the focus is on like your character making tactical decisions on like a round by round basis, it's kind of like playing chess with yourself. Like, yeah, you can do it, but it doesn't really have the same feeling as playing against somebody who you don't know what move they're going to make next.
yeah, that's fair. I've actually tried playing chess against myself, and it's remarkably difficult
Yes,
because
it is.
when you're thinking a couple of moves ahead, like, well, I'm going to do this, but then I'll do this, and then I'll do this. I'm like, well, I've just played the entire game and haven't moved the damn thing.
Yeah.
And I can see that happening very easily if you're both a DM and player.
So one of the things that comes up a lot, especially in smaller groups and smaller parties, and with newer groups more often than older groups, because older groups have experienced the troubles with it, is that a lot of times you will have, like, if everybody's, especially if they're new, if everybody's playing, everybody wants to be the player, be the hero, what have you. But in especially games like D&D, where somebody pretty much needs to play the GM, what'll frequently happen is that the GM will both play the world, as it were, and also play a character that's like in the party and exploring around. Now, those have been derogatorily defined as GMPCs, because especially for newer players, it's really hard for a newer GM to kind of separate, those duties, and they can kind of just take over things. But if you know what you're doing, GM's PCs aren't a bad thing, and they can really help. Like, say, like if we're playing with just two players and that's it, right? And you really want to play D&D as opposed to one of the other ones that are better folk done with smaller groups like that, then it can be really helpful to have the GM go like, all right, I'm going to also roll up a player character and he's going to join you on the quest, and that way, there's more people in the actual party and it's easier to run on the GM side in that way too, because you don't have to tailor everything down for a much smaller group than the game expects you to be running with.
Right. So if you have a thief and a fighter and the GM rolls
Mhm.
up a mage just because there's a gap missing or what have you,
Exactly.
it allows him to still have the magic based elements if needed, or
Yeah.
spell type door things, I assume.
Now, generally, I am going to qualify it this way. With better GMPCs, it tends to work a lot smoother if the GM's character is more of like a support character, like if they're not like one of the like main drivers of the plot or like the decision makers, but like the guy who kind of like sits back and let the others make the final decisions, because that way the players, like the non-GM players, can still like get that experience and they're not feeling like they're just being led by the nose to
And
where to go
y-
next.
yeah, and I think that also makes sense because if you're all right, so I'm going to take me as an example, and we full disclosure for people who are listening for the first time. My tabletop RPG experience has been extremely limited. I
Mm.
really only started playing consistently because of Anchor's group. That said, assuming I was a GM with a GMPC, I feel like it would be so difficult to play the play the world, play the game, drive to effectively provide the story that players are going to take however they want to take, and then not try and steer it toward what I want them to do. I feel like it would be, or you're almost better off playing either a dumb character or someone who just gives no fucks. Like, yeah, whatever, we'll do whatever we want. I'm just here for support if necessary. Like you're not going to take any kind of significant role playing role in any consequential decisions.
Yeah, like in one of my home games right now, we're playing Pathfinder 2, and the GM in that game has rolled up a GMPC, mostly because like it's a big crunchy game and he does want to play too, with the player options, but the character that he made is like very much like she doesn't make any decisions for the group, and she's designed as a crafter, so she fills a role that our group doesn't have at the moment. So she's filling part of the in-world composition that we need, but she's not, the one driving the plot and making decisions for us. She's just kind of along for the ride, and that is a much better way to do it, because like have you heard the term railroading in
Yep.
like the terms of RPG playing? Yeah.
Okay, I have, but you explain it anyway.
All right, so yeah, railroading, it's a very loaded term. Like, do not say, oh, it's such a nice railroad. Nobody says that. It is a very loaded derogative term. It's usually used in like what it exactly means is a great way to start flame wars on the internet. But in general, what it means is that like the GM has their plot in mind, and nothing the players do are going to change that.
Kind of like a train.
Yeah,
It's
it's like you
you're
are on the tracks, you are not
and
getting
this
off
is where
them.
you're going to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for a video game analogy, to me, that's say Sonic the Hedge, the Mega Drive Genesis Sonic the Hedgehog versus Elden Ring of today, where you can go and do basically anything.
Yeah, and those later that latter style where you're just plopped into a map full of things to do and you choose where you go off and do it. That's generally called sandbox style games in tabletop RPGs.
And so I realize we're jumping everywhere. This is much more of a general conversation, and you can get back on topic whenever you want. I'm genuinely asking
Oh,
you.
it's gonna go like this. Just wing with
And yeah, some
it.
episodes I think are naturally gonna be like this, but at least as long as we stay roughly on topic, I think we'll be fine.
Yeah.
That said, so if you're a GM, I assume and I'm not saying that GMs who railroad have a skill issue because I have never done it, so I have no context for this.
Hmm.
But I'm going to assume, based on if you, hey, this is the story I want to tell, this is how it's going to go, versus here's the world, what do you want to do? There's got to be a level of experience slash pre- experience of preparation and skill in that. So if Enko's DMing a game and it's like, hey, go do whatever you want, and I've decided that I'm going to stay in this town and run a bar, that might not be what Enko wanted to happen.
Yeah.
But now you've got to pivot to experiencing that and trying to either encourage you to go out of the bar or just see what happens.
Yeah, that is something that happens at least once in every new group's like tabletop experience, where the players will eventually realize that, hey, wait a minute, if our characters just sit down and open a business, then like, most RPG games don't have really great rule sets for simulating an economy, and you can break it open real easy by not being adventurers. And like it's
Who'd have thought?
yeah, right. And generally, like it's really easy to flounder in a situation like that, where the as the GM, you can place out all the plot hooks you want, but if the players aren't biting on any of them, then you can just kind of be left floundering, and that's part of what we were talking about. I can't remember I'm pretty sure it was last episode with the social contract and doing a session zero, where like the players and the GM should have come to a general agreement before the game started of what type of story they want to play. Like, some people will have issues with me using the word story there, but that's what I'm sticking with.
No,
And
I
like,
think that's fair. It to me it's a collaborative, like tabletop RPGs I've always seen them as a collaborative story,
yeah,
because ultimately that's what you're doing. Now if I'm GMing a game and I have a specific story I want to tell, maybe that's when I consider writing a fan fiction or a book or something, because
hmm,
there's no guarantee that the people I'm playing with have any inclination of telling the same story or want to tell the same story. So you don't want to have a, this is what the story I want to tell, mate. If you're so set on telling that, maybe write it yourself. And if you want help writing it, well, that's a different conversation than this is what we're playing. This is how we're going to play it.
yeah. Very broadly speaking, games, as I think of them, games can kind of be separated into like three general categories of like what type of game you're playing in that sense, because you have, like we already mentioned, sandboxes, which there's no real there's no expected progression of the story. It's just, here's the world that your characters exist in, what are the characters going to do inside of this world, and then let the plot develop from that. There's I personally like to call them theme park ones, where, because it avoids the negative connotations of railroads. But like theme park adventures are kind of the ones where there's everybody kind of generally knows that the large plot beats are roughly like they will happen in this order, and the GM is following a set plot line. But you can expect, everybody goes in knowing that there is a general plot line to expect, and you have wiggle room in how you're getting from point A, B, C, D. But like, when we're playing, it's like, hey, this is the story. You guys are playing characters going through this story. That's still a perfectly fine way of playing. You just need to make sure that that's the type of game that people want to play in. And then there's the third type, which is kind of like halfway in between, where there is overarching plot going on, but how, like, the players might not go A, B, C, D, E, da 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 da. They might go like A, Q, R, X, and like just bounce around the various plot beats, connecting them in whatever order interests them to, the ending. There's a rough idea of what the ending is going to be and like where the ending is going to happen, but how the players get there is entirely up to their own designs. And like, all of those play styles have their positives and negatives. Sandbox games tend to be held up as kind of like the holy grail, and probably not so much anymore, but definitely when I was growing up and playing. But I've also seen a lot of really badly done sandboxes, because like a lot of GMs will think, oh, with a sandbox, I don't need to have any story prepped whatsoever. I'll just drop them into a world and then they can decide what they want to do. But it's really easy when you're given a blank canvas to just sit there and have no idea what to do with it because it's a blank canvas. There's nothing that interests you in a field of white.
Right. I feel like that could be, and again, so this is a going back to what I said earlier, an experience issue. And as a new GM, I'm probably going to want to follow something that it comes from a module. So I realize that we haven't really touched on this. So, folks, there are hundreds, probably thousands of books you can get that will tell the story, give you a story to tell.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to jump in at some point. 'Cause I'm going to say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So many of them will give you like a module to tell within the setting of the world. So if you're playing D&D, if you're playing Pathfinder, there's going to be a book that said, hey, this is where they create their characters. Here's a story that you're gonna work them through. Now, obviously, for the most part, they're either going to succeed or fail in different things and may veer off. But you generally have an idea as to where they're going to go, which I've always thought is fantastic for newer GMs. Oh, hey, here's a module the story I want to tell, the module we're going to work through, but there's no guarantee that it's going to end the same way. How many times as a GM have people not gone the way that they're supposed to go for you personally in a
Oh,
I'm not asking in general because I don't want to I don't think
yeah.
you have a way of getting that answer.
Oh yeah, no. I've definitely experienced the gauntlet of it because like just as you can have GMs, you can have players who like deliberately try to, subvert what the game is expecting, and honestly, just generally they're being jerks because they're just they're derailing the entire game for their own enjoyment, regardless of how other people feel about it.
Right.
Everybody who's been in the scene for a while has experienced that at least once, and it's just not fun for anybody beyond the one doing it. But like in terms of just generally, oh, I didn't see that option coming. Honestly, that's my favorite part of being a GM is when because whenever you're planning out an adventure, especially when you're making it yourself, you're generally thinking like, okay, here's the scenario that they're going to be in, and I have a rough idea of what's going to happen if they decide to take option A or option B or option C. And those aren't like, oh, the players come in here. Hey guys, which option will you take? But it's like, they come in here. These are generally the kind of things I expect them to do. And if they do one of these things, I have this idea in mind for it. Nothing is more fun for me when I have A, B, and C figured out and they just pull D out of their hat. And it's like, that is amazing. Let's see where this goes. That is.
I again like that's the kind of thing that fascinates me is that you can do all the prep in the world and yet somehow someone is going to throw a curveball at you and be like, well shit, that was unexpected. How do I pivot from that? And yet I'm
Yep.
sure in many ways for you that would be a hell of a lot of fun because now all of a sudden you're still telling the same story, you're still getting them to the same place, but now how do you get them to that place when they have thrown you the curveball of, oh, we're going to do this instead of what you're expecting, and shit.
Yeah, like that right there is kind of the biggest difference between GMs who like prefer the more pre-written adventure style besides the one who prefer the more open sandbox style. Because in like the open sandbox style, like you may have a general idea of what A, B, and C are, but you're not committed to any of them. And when they come up with D, it's just that's an expected part of the play style that like, okay, everything from A, B, and C no longer matter at all because D happened and this is the way we're going. It's the story is entirely written by the player's actions. While in a more like pre-written adventure where you have the general plot arc, then yeah, it can get really challenging sometimes to figure out, okay, you guys chose option D. Option D, the adventure didn't account for, and I didn't account for. how, like, do I want to just go off the rails and use the idea of what's written down in the adventure to, like, figure out where the plot is going now, or do I want to try to, like, gently steer them, back into the next attraction and, like, to go get to the next prescribed plot beat? And is that possible? Is it worth attempting?
I feel like that's really going to depend on how you would have approached the, because realistically, there's a lot of preparation that goes into setting up this kind of game. I'm going to assume that there's how much you've put into it. It's like, oh, I've just spent the last 3 weeks preparing this specific this part of the adventure, and now you've decided to, instead of turning right, you've turned left, and I don't know how to get you to turn around.
And there's definitely been times, like, sometimes you just need to go above the table. Like, there's definitely been times where it's like, hey guys, like, I've spent the last 2 weeks preparing for this adventure, and if you guys don't turn left, I don't have anything planned. Because
If you turn right, then this is where the session ends for today, and I've got to figure out what's coming next.
yeah, and like that doesn't happen often, but sometimes that just does happen, because it's like, hey guys, like, what you choosing right means I have a lot of prep that I did not think of ahead of time, and I'm going to need time to figure this out.
Now,
And so,
I
yeah.
suppose the question that I'm sure people are wondering is why, if so they turn right instead of left, why couldn't you just use the prep that you did for turning left for turning right?
oh, that is what is known in the RPG discussion circles as the quantum ogre,
Okay,
where
what?
so the idea is that it's you're right. It's an illusion of choice when you, because that does happen all the time, but it shouldn't happen all of the time, because it's a complete illusion of choice. If, like, and to give the scenario where quantum ogre comes from, it's the idea of the adventurers are walking down a forest path, and it forks, and there's a left path and a right path, and the players choose a path. But from the GM's perspective, no matter what path they go down, they're going to encounter this ogre, which is just a complete illusion of choice. Because, like, what the players want to do doesn't matter in the end, because the GM is just going to do what he wants. That's what a quantum ogre is, and why it's frequently derided, because it's like, it's how to get into that. Ultimately, yeah, the GM is just going to do whatever they want to do, because, like, they're the ones in control of the world. Ideally, like, a good GM is going to try to make decisions that make the players feel like their choices matter, and that in that, like, their characters are growing and evolving, and, like, the players are getting to do what they want to do within reason. But ultimately, yeah, being the GM is the entire point of being a GM is you're trying not to shatter that illusion of choice. Because once that illusion of choice is shattered, the players are just never going to trust you.
So here's another question, and this is as a someone who's trying to understand the nature of the quantum ogre.
Yep.
To me, it wouldn't be a big deal if I went left or right, and you either way there was the ogre.
Yes.
I think the issue would be if I went left, saw the ogre, the hell with this, I'm going right, and you're like, there's two ogres.
And that is where the illusion of choice breaks. Is
Yeah,
because
because like you don't have anything for the other path.
yeah, like, no matter what the players decide, they're going to fight an ogre. And once that illusion is broken, and the players know that no matter what they decide, they're going to have to fight this ogre, then all of a sudden, why bother making any decisions at all? Because no matter what you decide to do, the GM is just going to make whatever they want to happen. And
Has
it's
there
that.
ever been a game that you've played specific, because I'm sure there has, where
Mm.
you go, oh, hey, we're going to go right, and you go down the path, and at the end of the session, it's, so what would have happened if we'd have gone left? And the GM's like, oh, there would have been A, B, and C, like they had it ready to go, but if they don't need it, they can push it
Oh
for
yeah,
further
that,
choice.
that happens all the time. And like, what's it's in rolling back to what you're talking about, prep and how much prep takes. That's it's kind of an arc that most like all GMs have different levels of prep they go through. Most generally tend to have a kind of an arc of like progression as they get better at GMing. Like, because when you first start, you will massively over prepare everything. Like, you will have everything down to the finest detail for if they choose options A, B, C, or D, even though just because that choice can only be made once, you're preparing 4 times more work than is ever going to get seen. As you get more used to GMing and comfortable with the concepts and skills required for GMing, then you can have them more like, okay, so if they go down this path, I have the vague idea that this is gonna happen, this path, this vague idea, and then when they choose that path, you can use your prior experience and knowledge of GMing to essentially, okay, I have the vague template in my head of what they're looking at, and I can build off of that template on the fly for whichever one they choose to go down. Does that make
Feel
sense?
like it does. So in some ways, I'm sure that there's also an element of, I've prepared at choice one, options A, B, C, D, and E. Now we're at choice four, and hey, I can cycle back and pull elements from options A, B, D, and E because they went down choice C, and
Oh
I can
yeah.
still pull that in. So it it seems to me that there's an element of being a GM. Yes, you may over prepare massively, but just because you've over prepared for choice one doesn't mean that the preparation can't come in useful elsewhere. So it's not a case of you being upset and disheartened that I did all this work and now none of it's going to come to fruition. No, it's not going to come to fruition then. But now you have 4 other pathways ready to go on whatever journey that they're going to be taking that you can pull from, or even frankly, flat out reuse,
Yep.
as long as it's within the context of it. They're not going to know. They're not going to know
Nope.
that, oh, hey, this entire adventure is effectively the leftovers from the choice. Like, look, we all love eating pizza. I may have some leftover pizza in my fridge right now. There is nothing better than when I'm really hungry. What do I want? Oh, that pizza's only 2 days old. I can have that. I can have the leftovers of whatever I made there. And now I have an entirely new meal that I would never have thought to have made myself unless it was for the leftovers. And it strikes me as the same thing when you're DMing. I don't have anything, but I have ingredients from this dungeon crawl, this town here. I can pull something together and they're never going to know. And then my work hasn't been wasted.
Exactly. And like, even if you don't reuse those exact set pieces, just the practice of building them is part of what makes it easier for you to do stuff on the fly later on, because you have those like building blocks in your head of like, oh yeah, I remember I sketched out this. I can like use that similar idea to build this brand new thing completely on the fly because I've had that practice and that experience doing it now. I can just whip it up as I go. But
So when it
yeah.
comes to you create the adventure, you've got all the prep work that goes into it.
Hmm.
I can imagine that in that case, cycling back to DMPC, it'd be really hard to have that and not trying to encourage. But I've got 4 options, but I really want them to go for the middle one. How do I encourage that? And it would feel like to me that's something that you would have to set up within the same session so that it's still in people's minds that you can say, oh, hey, in 4 weeks when we have this, and this as an option, you should always do option A.
Yeah.
You've almost got to set that up when there's a critical junk thing about to happen, either through conversations within a town that players are having, that as a DM or GM, you're able to lead and slowly encourage, not unlike a video game where people's like, oh, hey, again, I'm going to go back to Elden Ring, which is
Hmm.
notoriously difficult. Have you played Elden Ring?
Oh God, yes.
Okay. So for those who haven't played, Elden Ring is to me, it is an action RPG, but it's much more of a and just tell whatever story you're going to tell. Here are the elements. You can make your character whatever you want to be. There are some quest lines which are very difficult to follow, not because they're hard, but because you've really got to pay attention to what people are saying. And it gets to the point in one of them where one of the characters just yells, "Find the Albinaric woman!" And and at that point, like, I wonder where the Albinaric woman is. So you talk to him again, and he tells you almost exactly where she is, which is very unlike Elden Ring.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the kind of thing that would happen if you're DMing and you want them to do something similar, and then you would just have to include hints to that throughout the conversations that they're having, and make sure that when the choice is presented, you're building upon the hints that you've created.
Yeah, so like that was I used the term earlier, but do you do know what I mean when I say like plot hooks, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so like that's kind of the fun thing. Plot hooks can be both very subtle and very blatant. Sometimes the plot hooks are like, oh, this random rumor mentioned this one thing that vaguely alludes to this entire mini arc I have planned over here. And other times it's, yeah, no, hey, I'm telling you directly, go find this person. This is where you can find them.
Now, if you're creating an adventure
Hmm.
and you don't know the players you're playing with, for example, if you're going to create an adventure for me,
Yeah.
yes, we've played together, but I've very much been in the background. You may not necessarily know what I'm going to do. How do you guide someone to that point where you don't even know if I'm paying enough attention to get the hints?
Well, there's I'm gonna break that into 2 points here. In the first point, when it comes to like making plot hooks essentially tailored for players, that's part of what session zero encapsulates, because like you're asking the GM should be trying to figure out like what type of adventures the players want to be on, and then they can drop hooks specifically to kind of like fulfill those fantasies, because as a player you're a lot more likely to bite on a hook that you know you is something you personally want to explore and have fun with than something completely unrelated. And on the other hand, when it comes to, just like when you're in an active game and you're trying to figure out new plot hooks to drop for like, especially like for somebody like you who was brought into a pre-existing game later on, if somebody's trying to drop a plot hook for somebody like you, then it's either the GM just trying to gauge you as a player and try to figure out what you want at the table, which is yet another learned GM skill, or it could just be as blatant as above the tabletop saying, hey Alex, what kind of adventures does your character want to go on, and then incorporating that information into the story.
So there's really no right or wrong way to do it. It's just very much a paying attention to your players, or even flat out asking, "Hey, this is where we're at. What do you want to do?"
Yeah, like for how I tend to run my games right now, because I'm very much of a you should only ever prep a session or two ahead of time. Anything more than that, you're going to be doing a lot of work that will probably never matter. And what I tend to try to do is I try to leave like the pivotal decisions to happen like at the end. Like I try to time pivotal decisions to happen like at the end of a session. So like you guys have defeated the boss and you've recovered the plot token and you guys are ready to celebrate and move on to the next adventure. Then at the end of that session, like once we're done, then I'll recap. So, all right, so you guys have finished this. These are the things that your characters like know about and could potentially want to follow up on. What do you guys what do you guys as players, where do you want to go next? And then like once we've had that discussion, then I can spend that time before the next session planning out where I know their characters are going to go, because we've had that discussion, and I can tailor the adventure to that. And like there'll still be plenty of decisions that they can make during the adventures that'll split things off, But when it comes down to like, hey, do you want to go to the underground crypt or do you want to go to the castle in the sky? By timing those questions to be at the end of the adventure, I'm not designing a whole area that might make no sense for what they want. I'll be able to just focus on where I know they're planning to go.
And to me, that doesn't like I realize we've talked about railroading, etc. That is as far from railroading as you can be, because you're giving them the choice of, hey, you can either go to A or B.
Yeah.
I just need to know which one so I can prepare that story branch. And to me, that then goes back to the social contract of, well, we know Enko's done the work preparing the underground cavern, but we've talked about it all of a sudden at the beginning of the session, and the characters now feel they want to go to the opposite way.
Yeah.
Do you then at that point say, cool, so this is the end of the session for today, and we'll come back next week and I'll have that ready to go?
Well, generally for me, just because we can get together like once a month, if that. If they jumped that out on me at the very start of the session, I tend to just play with friends. And if my friends jump me with that at the very start of the session, you'd be like, "What the hell, guys? You had a month to talk to me about this. Why are you just telling me this now?" But more seriously, it would be like, okay, I can either try to like wing something and figure it out as we go, and I'm being very upfront that I'm winging it and trying to figure it out as we go, or you guys can give me like until next session to figure it out. Generally speaking, because that's happened obviously, what I have done in that scenario has just been like, okay, number one, as friends, fuck you guys, don't do that to me. But I'm gonna take like half an hour to just get a general figure out in my head to wing where we're going. And then once I've had that time to kind of replot, then we'll hop in and start the game.
And see, again, like I feel like that's the kind of thing, like, okay, oh, it's going to take you half an hour, well, maybe we'll go the other way instead. Oh,
Yeah,
no,
and like,
no, now we're doing this.
I mean, I will present that like as a choice. It's like, hey guys, if if you guys really want to go to the castle in the sky instead of the underground crypt that you told me you wanted to and that I prepped for, we can do it. But you're going to need to give me like half an hour or an hour to prep it
Yeah.
because I have all the stuff for the underground crypt. And if you guys want to make that decision, that's fine by me. But you're losing like half an hour to an hour of gameplay as I get ready for this.
Yeah, because you can't just, especially when it's a dedicated adventure like that, you can't come up with I assume some people could come up with it on the fly,
Oh yeah, definitely.
but you want to also tell a good story. I know when I've been writing before, regardless of what it is, I can do a first draft pretty easily.
Mm.
And then the time is spent refining that. I had to write an icebreaker speech a month or two ago, and I wrote it in half an hour. It's like a
Yeah.
5 minute speech, 5 to 7 minute speech, and I wrote it in half an hour. But then it took me the better part of an hour and a half to streamline it, make sure it was long enough, not too long, etc. So yeah, I can write stuff quickly, but the time doesn't come in the creation, it's the refinement. And I feel like that's when someone springs something like that on you. Yeah, you might have this bare skeleton of an idea, but they're missing out on all the nuance of, continue the metaphor,
Mm.
the nervous system, the muscle, their skin, etc. Like you're missing out on a lot of that when you've just got the skeleton of an idea, and you know what? It might be a gorilla by the time we're done, but we're gonna see what it looks like.
Yeah, and like that is very much one of those things that like yeah, there are once you've had like enough practice and experience as a GM, it's a lot easier and a lot faster to just go, okay, I have this mental library of ideas and experience that I can just wing this right off the cuff. But that is a skill that you have to build and practice with. It's if you're a brand new GM and somebody jumps that on you, you're going to flounder just because it's not a situation you have experience in being able to work around.
Yeah, like that wouldn't be something that I would find in any way, shape, or form fun if that was my one of my first sessions, because obviously I'm going to assume that by the time you're giving them that choice, you've already had at least 2 or 3 sessions under your belt.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're not going to be able to just create something new off the fly. Again, so going back to the pre-made modules, that's probably something that I assume that they would have some kind of, hey, if players go down this way, do this. If they go down that way, do that.
Exactly. And yeah, it can be a lot of it can be a lot of work, but it is a lot of fun too. But it's not for everyone. But to to try to pull everything back to what we were originally intending this subject to be about.
Do you know what? Honestly, I don't remember what that was. I remember we've just been talking about GMing, and that seems to be the way it's flowing. So,
Yep. No. Because like getting back to what the original topic subject was, this is actually a great branch point for it. For the, because you can play a game without a GM and having somebody not being in that role. There's a couple of different ways that tends to happen. Either like, because I already mentioned like the GMPC way is kind of a way that happens where the GM is both the player and the computer running the game. But you also find games where what would normally be the GM's responsibilities are kind of distributed among the players. Like you will have like one, I can't remember the name of the game offhand, but there's one game where it's much, when you're playing without a GM, things do tend to be a lot more collaborative, just because like you don't have one mind like kind of generating the world for you. It's everybody in the group collaboratively generating the entire world together, right?
yeah.
So you would have like games where like there's one where I wish I could remember the bloody name of it right now, but the idea is like in combat and stuff, it's whoever is playing, it's like okay, you play your character, then the person to your left will play one of the monsters, and then the next person goes, and the person to their left plays one of the monsters, and like it's kind of, it's a lot less players versus the world and GM, and more of like the players going, oh hey, like what would be interesting in this scenario? Oh, it makes the most sense for this goblin is the closest to your character, and you just tried to stab him, so this goblin is going to try to attack you, and then the players kind of agreeing that that's what would happen and rolling the dice to see the results of it.
See, that would be interesting because you'd have a lot of different ideas as to how goblins work,
Hmm.
and then I'm sure at the same time you've also got someone's like, this goblin has just seen you all completely demolish his tribe, and now you're or save him from a troll, and now he's either going to follow you along, or he's going to run away. So I'm going to assume in that method you end up with new characters to the party just by virtue of how the story's being told.
Yeah, and like it's the just because of the collaborative nature of it, you tend to like everybody will have their character, but it tends, obviously not for every game, but it tends to be more of a like theater where you aren't just playing your character and like just focusing on like winning as that character, but you're thinking like, okay, what would this character do in the setting, and what in the setting would be interesting to happen to this character. You're not playing it. You're not playing it so much as like I'm the protagonist and I am playing to win, so much as like, okay, like this is the character that I am currently in control of, but it's the story around them tends to be more important than that specific character. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. That to me is more akin to what I used to do 20 years ago. Is that you would almost tell the story yourself. Yes, you have a character that you're primarily responsible for, but at the same time, there were now again there weren't any dice rolls, so it's very much a play by post with no randomization.
Mm.
But it's akin to me. It's akin to that where everyone's controlling the enemy, what have you, together because that makes the most sense in that moment.
Yeah, like GM-less RPGs specifically, the dice and resolution mechanics tend to be around, whenever like an interesting an interesting thing where you're not sure of what way things would go, that's where the dice would come in. Where it's like, okay, this monster is going to attack my character. Well, how successful are they going to be? We roll the dice to determine that. We don't just decide how successful they would be. But
That
like
makes sense.
the goblin deciding to attack is something the players
Would agree
generally,
upon.
yeah, like
Yeah.
like there's certain games where you'd make like a disposition roll to see how they feel about them or what have you, that can influence that decision. But like ultimately those types of decisions tend to be more the players going, what makes the most sense in this scenario? And what tends to happen is, do you know what you know do you know what like a oracle would be in that like kind of framework?
Explain it anyway, because if I'm unsure, I'm sure I'm not the only one that's unsure.
Fair enough. So oracles are functionally just like random generation lists. Like there'll be like lists of different things that could potentially happen in very vague terms. And then like if you guys aren't sure like what is going to happen like next in the adventure, or what's going to be in the next room, or what type of creature you're going to be facing, you would roll on a related table, and then that will give you like, it's a writing prompt is the best way I can think of to describe it. Because like you like walk into rooms like, what's in the room, roll dice. Okay, it says that the prompt is monsters playing cards. Okay, where our characters are now, what would that look like? Okay, it would probably be something like this. Okay, that's what we see when we go into the room.
That's a really interesting way to play. Now, I'm saying that as someone who's never seen it. Like,
Mm,
that would be, to me, that would almost be not unlike a board game in
yeah.
in certain ways. So again, like we've touched on this already, but I'm just going to ask the question. I'm going to ask it now.
Yep.
Is there a difference like a more story driven board game like Elder Sign, for example?
Mm.
And I'm only saying that because I played it once and it kind of fits my analysis. And folks, if you haven't played Elder Sign, I can't explain it to you because I really don't remember that much about how to play it. So that is something that you're going to need to Google or just accept the example is whatever you're thinking it is. Would it be something more like Elder Sign where you can choose what room to go in and then you flip the cards, etc., versus an actual, I forget where I was going with this point because of my Elder Sign tangent. So
Oh,
to me, like, is playing without a GM more like a story-driven board game, or is it still technically a tabletop RPG? And for you, where does the difference lie between something like Elder Sign and a GM-less RPG?
well, another really good example for people who may not have played Elder Sign is, have you played Gloomhaven?
No, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, Gloomhaven is very, very similar in that respect of, it really straddles the line between what a board game is and what an RPG is, because you will have characters that, you can choose where to go on the map, and you can, you explore dungeons and you level up and you improve and you make decisions that affect the story. And in a lot of ways, it's a board gamified RPG. And for me personally, the biggest difference between playing something like a board game and an RPG, for me, where the difference lies, is that you're not confined to the rules. Like if we if we're playing a GM-less RPG and we decide that we want, inspiration from the oracles, we roll on the dice and it says you encounter monsters playing cards, we can look at that and go, you know what, I'm not really feeling that, or you know what, that doesn't work for the scenario, and we can either re-roll or we can just entirely make something else up, and the game isn't going to break because of that.
Right. So it's you still got the choice of whether or not you want to follow along with a GM-less RPG versus Gloomhaven, where you go in the room and this is what you're going to see. How do you react and how do you deal with it? But you're still going to end up with functionally the same situation.
Exactly. Because yeah, it's cause with rolling like oracles and stuff, they're entirely, they're prompts. They're not, you have to use this. It's, oh, you're not sure what might be in here. Here's a general idea that you can or can choose not to work with.
It feels in many ways like, I don't know if you've ever played Metal Gear Solid. I'm assuming
Oh
you
yeah.
have.
Oh yeah.
And so the most recent one, Metal Gear Solid 5, which is not recent in terms of video games, allows you, not unlike Sniper Elite, the choice of, do you go in quiet, do you go in loud, do you go in at a distance, or do you go in up close?
Mm.
And then when I say go in at a distance, you snipe people off, etc. The end result is still that you're going to finish the mission and get whatever you need to do done. But it's up to you how you do that. And I feel like that is more of a Gloomhaven thing versus the Elden Ring aspect of even a GM-less RPG, where you can still choose what you want to do and how you approach it, as opposed to just how you approach something.
Yeah, and like for just for the people listening along here, my personal favorite example right now of a GM-less RPG, and that I highly suggest people look up if they're interested in that concept, is a game called Ironsworn. It's, last I looked, the base PDF is still free to grab if you want to. So there's, if it's something that interests you in general, that's probably one of the leading examples I can think of right now of a GM-less game that's still group play.
Interesting. I will, if you send me the link, I will add that into the show notes for people who are interested. Because again, because it's a free game. I don't feel in any way, shape, or form that we're advertising anything. Because again, like this is words are hard on a Saturday morning, and it's
Yep.
Sunday, so there we go. It, it's not like we're telling you to go somewhere to buy it because we get some kind of referral link. We don't. We genuinely don't. This is a very much a, hey, this is free. Check it out if you're interested.
Yeah. But yeah, so like that would be that's my current favorite example of it, and honestly, I would love more eyes on it in general because I know they've come up with other versions for other genres. Like Ironsworn is its basic theming. Cause like obviously you can reskin things as much as you want, but the basic theming for Ironsworn is very much like mildly fantasy Viking in like its theming and its the world that it exists in. But they've done other ones where like they'll get like sci-fi and other stuff like that. But I like Ironsworn. People should check it out because I do think it's a fun game.
Fantasy Viking is always a good way to describe anything.
Exactly. But it is. I will warn, like for people who've only ever played stuff like D&D, it is a very very different style of RPG, and it can be easy to bounce off of if you're used to a more rigidly defined tactical system because like it's very much more fiction focused because it's the players that are in control of everything.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I feel like it would be an adjustment if you're not used to it. And I feel that depending on the nature of the group that you play with, again, so for folks that aren't aware, the group that Enko pulled me into is very much we're going to play this for a month, we're going to play that for another month, and you just bounce between different things. So the adaptability of that group is probably higher than, for me, again, with minimal basis for comparison,
Hmm.
the adaptability would be higher than other groups where you're not used to bouncing back and forth between different things. And how much would that play into whether or not you can enjoy different things when you do have a that level of flexibility in how you play?
Well, it's, it's actually kind of funny that you bring up our group for that because, like, honestly, for like our group, I honestly don't think they would. I don't think our group would work for something like Ironsworn because our group we bounce around a lot of different systems, but most of those systems have at least some level of tactical, crunchy play to them. While something like Ironsworn that's very fiction focused, you've seen how well our group can concentrate when the GM's trying to explain anything. Can you imagine us staying focused and actually collaborating and keeping in mind what each other is saying for the entire time we're playing?
Yeah, fair point.
Yeah, like having groups that can play more makes it easier to switch over to that style of gameplay, but it is still a very different mindset, and some people just aren't going to be able to adapt to it.
Yeah, I feel that no, you're absolutely right. Yes, the group is flexible, but the nature of the group is very conversational and above table, and you're right. And I think so. It obviously goes into as a GM or as a group, knowing the nature of your group and what you can and can't accomplish together that way.
Mm-hmm.
So we've touched on the nature of a GM, a game master. Can you play and also be a GM? Building an adventure and playing without a GM. But what if your group wants a GM, but you don't know where to go to find one?
Oh, that is the $1,000,000 question right there. Because like from a pure logistics standpoint, on average, you need one GM for every 4 players, right? And most people want to play. Like not nearly as many people want to GM as want to play because GMing is a lot more work and you don't get to be the hero. So it's just not as appealing for a lot of people. A lot
I
of the
would
times, what it boils down to is just one of you is going to head a pony up and try GMing. If you have a group of people that already want to play, but you can't find a GM, one of you just needs to buckle down and be willing to give it a shot.
I would argue that you said you can't be the hero. In a story, no. But in a group of friends, you are the hero because you're the one doing the work. Now, and again, going back to our group, the fact that you have 3 or 4 people that I have seen GM out of a 7-person group. Is
Seven
it
or eight,
three?
depending on who
Seven.
shows up.
Yeah, so half of the group has GM'd. I know that there's at least one who isn't likely to be willing to do it, and 2 that can't just because of where we play.
Hmm.
So realistically, and I think the only other person I'm thinking of would GM if they had a chance to. So of an 8-person group, at least 5 to 6 people would be willing to GM if given the opportunity. You're in a hell of a good standing there because of the nature of the bouncing back and forth. So it's one of those things where once I assume you've found the people you're playing with and you've established in however many areas you need to that hey, at some point we're all going to play and we're all going to GM, but it's going to be a multi-year thing. I
Hmm.
feel like at that point it's just a case of literally waiting for your turn.
And like one thing that some groups will do, and I would honestly personally recommend at least trying if you are a group that's just starting out and you don't have a GM and you do settle on the okay, one of us is going to have to do it, is if you do more of like a sandbox style play where like it's just a relatively unrelated standalone adventures every month, like even if you're playing the same characters, is do like a rotating GM setup where like, one person will run one dungeon and then, they will take off their GM hat and put on their player hat and the next player in line will put on their GM hat and run an adventure and then, you just keep rotating out who the GM is so everybody is getting that experience of learning what it's like to GM, but also getting that experience of being able to play. And generally, if you can get a full group of people who try rotating GMs, then it quickly becomes apparent who is like more suited for being a GM, like who's more interested in it, who picks it up more, and who absolutely hates it. And then once you have that figured out, it's a lot easier to settle into like, okay, like out of the five of us, two of us despise GMing, one of us absolutely loves it, and one of us is okay with, bouncing back and forth. You may as well let the one who loves it, drive the bus
Carry
for
on.
the most part.
And then if you need if they want a break, then the other person can be on deck to do that.
Exactly. 'Cause like that's functionally how it works with our group is we have our usual GM who GMs most of the time. He prefers GMing to playing, but sometimes he wants to like step back. Like it could just be something like his work is super busy or he just needs a general break. And then like me or one of the other guys that are comfortable with GMing and like GMing will step up with something that we have to run, whether it's something in the same setting with the same characters or something completely unrelated just for a change of pace.
Who would have thought in the world of collaborative storytelling and gaming that collaboratively figuring out who's going to play in GM would also make sense?
It's an astonishing new idea. Just try talking to each other.
I it, yeah, again, so many things can be solved by that, but I'm not going to get into that. So again, like it's one of those things where the nature of the game is, as you said it before, it's a social contract where you all agree for however long you need to play for to follow some of the written and unwritten rules, which maybe we'll delve into a bit more at some point.
Hmm.
And yet at the same time, you also want to make sure that everyone's having fun. So hey, are you enjoying being GM? Yeah, but I could do with a break. No worries, I'll do it. It's all it takes.
Yep.
That's all it takes.
And people should just touch base with each other in general. But yeah, no, it's significantly better for the long-term health of your group if you guys are able to check in on each other like that and make sure that the people who are GMing are still happy GMing and that the
Mm-hmm.
people who are playing are enjoying where the story's going so far and are still enjoying their characters and what have you.
And the thing is, if you've spun up, and this is something we could probably touch on again, like if you've, or next episode, if you've created a character that you don't like, there are different ways to deal with it. You either do it above the table and say, hey, I'm not really a fan of this, can I create a new one? Or you can, within the story, try and kill them so you can create a new one,
Hmm.
and that can be where your enjoyment comes from.
Yep. Well,
But
there's been a few times where I've had like, hey, this character is really not working for me, and depending on the reason why it's not working for me, like it could be that I like the concept of the character, but how I've mechanically built them just isn't fun. So we'll either just, talk to the GM and either completely rework how the character is made mechanically but keep the fiction the same, or come up with something that happens within the fiction to change how they play, or you can just write them off and they write off into the sunset. Like you don't
yeah,
need to kill a player. You don't need to player. You don't need to kill a player character to bring in a new one. You can just like they could retire or they could go off screen to complete another objective somewhere else that just takes them out of the party for a while, or like there's so many different things that you can do because it's just functionally you just treat them like people and people aren't glued to each other. You can go off and do other things. People go their own separate way all the time.
what a unique concept. I think we may have found the starting point for next episode. There's a lot more to talk about around creating a character, playing the character, and how you can retire a character if needs be.
Mm,
How to deal with tragic and catastrophic injuries to a character,
Ooh, that's a good one.
right? So I think that's about more or less. I don't know if I have any more questions about the finding a GM. I know we've touched on finding a GM within the friend group, and we've also touched on in previous episodes. I think it's Roll20 and
Yep.
different websites that you can actually join a pre-made game where the GM is ready and looking for players. That tends to be online, and you don't always. Maybe you sign up with a group, maybe you don't. That is another option if you're looking for a more digitized version of the game. But again, in person, it's rotate, see how it works. Or hell, maybe there's a GM at the local game store that's willing to run a game for a group of people to see how that goes. I don't know if we have anything like that where we are, but I know it's an option in bigger cities.
Yeah, well, where we are, we're in a bit of a smaller area, which I'm still surprised that we have the number of game stores we do, given our area. Mm, But
Yeah,
yeah, it's like it's always possible, especially like because a lot of game stores like have their own Discord or chat or whatever nowadays. Almost all of them will have some form of looking for group channel in there where you can join in and go like, hey, I live in the area. Is there any like games open right now, or is there any GMs looking to run something because I'm interested in playing? Or you could be a GM and looking for a group. You will find groups a lot faster than you will find GMs because there's a lot more people that want to play rather than run a game. So GMs are a lot harder to
the
come across.
yeah players are a dime a dozen. GMs are not. I was gonna make a joke about the cost of the price of a dozen eggs, but I thought I probably shouldn't go there. So yeah, again, it comes down to the different options available to you. But finding a GM amongst a group of people willing to play is probably your easiest bet,
and I
regardless of how new everyone is. Someone is going to be willing to take a turn if they know they don't have to do it long term. I mean, hey,
hmm,
maybe they enjoy it.
exactly. And I would be remiss if talking about GMless games, I didn't at least mention solo play games.
You're right, because we never touched on those at all, and that was in my list of questions to ask you, and I've somehow completely gone off away from it.
Well, we have ironically gone off the rails quite a bit in this one, but it's been fun. So, but yeah, for solo play games, as you can kind of guess from the title, games where it's just the one person playing all by themselves. Now, a lot of games that are designed to be GMless can be run solo play because, it's just you have a party size of one. But there are games that are designed explicitly to be solo gameplay experiences. And my favorite go-to example on this one is, and probably will always will be, it's called Thousand-Year-Old Vampire. And it's kind of like a journaling game in a lot of ways because the idea of it is that you're writing journal entries, and like you're actually writing them. You're writing journal entries as this vampire living out their centuries of existence, but there's mechanical stuff in there around like the people you get to know and the assets you've acquired and like what can happen to them. And there's a lot of randomly generated events that you kind of have to look at what you have, look at the event in question and figure out like what happens with that. Like, easy example, one of the random events that can happen is somebody betrays you, and you have to look at who your character has become close with over the previous entries and roles and generations. You need to look at them, decide, okay, which one of these characters would have betrayed the vampire, and like why did they do it and what the fallout was. And then you write your journal entry as the thousand-year-old vampire, hey, this happened to me, I'm journaling about it, and then you write it from that perspective.
Interesting. I I feel like that almost blends into again, like I know I've brought it up before, it almost
Yep.
blends into a board game aspect of things where you don't necessarily create the character explicitly. You're giving guidelines on how you want to play it. But again, like the amount of times I've seen solo play board games and effectively choose your own adventures. Yes, I recognize that they're different beasts in general, but I think on
Mm.
the whole, they're not, because you're still creating the story by yourself using tools other people have given you.
I would honestly describe a solo play game like Thousand Year Old Vampire as, like a choose your own adventure novel with the training wheels taken off.
Oh, I like that.
Because instead of having, these are your discrete options, flip to the page and find out what happens, it's okay, your vampire has slept for a decade, roll to see what kind of event happens while they were out, and then you get that vague prompt and you sit there and go, okay, I need to personally like decide and flesh out what that prompt means and what actually happened.
Yeah. And I think that again, that also prepares you for GMing in general for a larger group. If you're fleshing out the prompt for yourself and then
Yeah.
reacting to it, it allows you to, at the very least, get used to fleshing out a story and adventure for someone. Now, again, am I saying that a GMless game is D&D with training wheels or tabletop RPGs with training wheels? No, no, it's very different things. But it allows you to build a skill set that you can then use for that.
You know, I do in a lot of ways like the comparison to board games because you find a lot of arguments online is like, whether or not narrative focused RPGs are really RPGs or whether solo RPGs are really RPGs. And it's just kind of like it's the same as the genre of board games. Like, Risk is a very different style of board game than Codenames is, but they're both still board games. They're still under that large umbrella of board games. And like something like D&D and Thousand Year Old Vampire are very different RPGs, but they're still under that umbrella of an RPG.
So I think what we're saying is that however you want to play, there are ways to play.
Yeah, as long as everyone at the table is enjoying themselves, you're golden.
Hey, thanks for watching Board Game today. We always appreciate your views and your support, but there are so many ways for you to support our site. Not only can you do right here on video, but you can go and check us out at boardgametoday.com where we have more news, reviews, interviews, everything you could ever want. But since you're here, if you could, you can always give us a like, subscribe, or share our videos or watch something else. Is always much appreciated, and get your game on.